welcome everybody to Dig Deeper, episode 20 something. I don't know. I never know what episode it is.
28.
28.
Yeah.
And I'm Sian. I'm not John. I'm standing in for him for a few weeks, and you all know Stephen by now. So we are finding our way through Mark. We're edging towards the cross. And this week we have got a really full passage. So Stephen's going to read right up until the end of chapter 12.
So Mark 12, right?
Mark 12, verse 13.
13 to the end of the chapter. Okay. And they send some of the Pharisees and the Herodians to him in order that they might trap him in words. And approaching, they say to him, "Teacher, we know that you are truthful and that you have no anxiety concerning anyone, for you do not regard men's persons, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to render the poll tax to Caesar or not? May we render it, or may we not render it?" But he, recognizing their pretense, said to them, "Why do you try me? Bring me a denarius so that I see it." And they brought it, and he says to them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" And they say to him, "Caesar's." And Jesus said to them, "Render the things that are Caesar's to Caesar, and the things that are God's to God." And they were utterly amazed at him. And Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, approached him and questioned him, saying, "Teacher, Moses wrote to us that if the brother of anyone should die and leave behind a wife and leaves no child, his brother should take his wife and should raise up and seed for his brother. There were 7 brothers, and the first took a wife and dying left no seed, and the second took her and died, leaving no seed behind, and the third likewise, and the 7 left no seed. Last of all, the wife died. In the resurrection, when they rise again, of which of them shall she be the wife? For the 7 had her as a wife." Jesus said to them, slapping his forehead, "Have you not been led astray?" I added that part.
Slapping his forehead, I love that.
You've been led astray, knowing neither the scriptures nor the power of God. For when they rise again from the dead, they neither marry nor are married, but are as angels in the heavens. But regarding the dead, they are raised. Have you not read in the book of Moses how in the bush God spoke to him, saying, "I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob"? He is not a God of the dead, but of the living. You go far astray." And one of the scribes approaching, hearing them debating and perceiving that he answered them well, asked him, "Which commandment is first among all?" Jesus answered, "The first is, Hear Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And you shall love the Lord your God out of your whole heart, and out of your whole soul, and out of your whole reason, and out of your whole strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." And the scribe said to him, "Well said, teacher. You speak the truth in saying that there is one and there is no other beside him. And to love him out of the whole heart and out of the whole understanding and out of the whole of one's strength, and to love the neighbor as oneself is more than all sacrifice and trial." Jesus, seeing that he answered wisely, said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And no one dared interrogate him any more. And Jesus, teaching in the temple, spoke aloud, "How do the scribes say that the anointed is the son of David? David himself, in the Holy Spirit, said, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit upon my right until I put enemies at your feet.' David himself calls him Lord. And how is he his son?" And the large crowd heard him with delight. And in the course of his teaching, he said, "Be wary of the scribes who desire to walk around in long robes and desire salutations in the marketplace, and chief seats in the synagogues and chief couches at meals. Those devouring the homes of the widows and praying at great length for show, these shall receive condemnation in greater abundance." And sitting opposite the treasury, he watched how the crowd puts coins into the treasury, and many rich men put in a great deal. And one destitute widow came and put in 2 lepta, which is a quadrans, in case you didn't know. And summoning his disciples, he said to them, "Amen, I tell you that this widow, the destitute woman, put in more than all those donating to the treasury. For all donated out of what they have in abundance, but out of her poverty, this woman donated all she had whatsoever, her whole livelihood." Well, that's the end of that reading.
Amen.
So I definitely want to make sure we get to that widow at the end.
Let's get to the widow at the end. Let's start with the beginning, because I
You
actually
had an idea, Sian. You said you thought it was interesting how the temple tax was connected to the widow. Tell me what you're thinking about this.
Well, so it feels to me, I mean, I feel like we need to talk about the temple tax in good detail, because I'm sure that you have got a new way of understanding it that few of us have heard before.
Pretty political, yeah.
But it feels as though what he's saying is not, he's not saying this is the bit that you give to Caesar and this is the bit that you give to God.
Right.
What he's saying ultimately is everything is God's.
Mm-hmm.
Money is,
yeah,
it's just money.
Yeah.
Give everything to God.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that it's interesting then that there are a few points in this passage where he talks about giving everything to God. So there's the love to give God with all your heart and all your soul, and all your understanding, all your strength. And then at the end, you've got this woman giving everything she has to God, rather than giving out of a portion of her income, if that makes sense.
Right.
And it's interesting that I guess this whole passage is framed like the money bit at the beginning, the money bit at the end.
Okay.
And it just feels like a challenge to us, I guess, to think about, are we actually giving everything to God, as opposed to portioning out our lives? This bit is my political life, this bit is my financial life, this bit is my spiritual life.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It's interesting because I didn't actually make that. I didn't really notice that those two stories come so close together, actually.
Yeah, I've never noticed it before until I read it. I think it's an accident, actually, that we've got these two passages. I think I got the passage wrong last week.
Oh, I see.
So it's convenient, maybe, that but yeah, it is interesting they're quite close together.
There is another thing going on, though, which is also that there is an ambivalence about the temple that's happening here.
Okay.
So I don't think either of these stories are actually about money.
Okay.
Not really. I mean, I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong, but I also don't think that the stories begin and end with talking about money.
Okay.
I think they're also talking about the temple.
Right.
And what that means, and what that means to people, right?
Okay.
So I don't know what to do with this stuff. I honestly don't know sometimes what to do with it when we don't have the temple. Like, that doesn't.
Yeah, we don't have an equivalent. Right? Yeah.
So it's funny when we get this stuff that is talking about money, it's really hard not to just make it about money.
Yeah.
But I also am aware that there's always something else going on as well. So
why is it about the temple? Let's go back to both the bit with the woman and the bit with Caesar's taxes. You're saying both of those are actually about it.
Yeah, and even again, first of all, Mark, we just started at Mark 13, but if you look just up, if you'll remember, we were talking about the stone in verse 10, 11, and 12. Yeah. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and they desired to seize him because they were afraid of the crowd, because he knew the parable was against them. So remember, Jesus has just spoken about, basically he's made himself a temple.
Yeah.
He said, I'm the one that you're building your hopes and dreams around now.
Yeah.
Right? Not the temple. So, and the temple kind of represents the chosen people as well. Like, it's not just the religious building, it's also the kind of meaning, the identity of the people. Yeah. So then you get to the next story, which is this one about paying taxes to Caesar. But the thing is, it's not the money that was the poll tax that was being charged was the tax that Caesar was levying on the Jews for the right to worship in their own temple.
Right.
So this is where it's a temple story.
So it's not actually like council tax. That's not what he's talking about here.
It wasn't a tax to keep the streets clean and the sewage pipes running smooth. And it wasn't a municipal tax.
Okay.
So you often hear preachers will talk about this during tax time as if it's all about being a good citizen.
Yeah.
Citizens. But it's kind of the opposite. Well, I'm going to show you why it's preached as if it's a pro-patriotic section. It's actually an anti-patriotic teaching.
Yeah.
And this is the headline that you need to know, because So Caesar had taken over, the Romans had taken over the Jews, and it was like an insult. And Caesar said, you Jews think you're so special. You need to pay me for the right to worship in your own temple.
Right.
And it was like this racial insult.
Okay.
And it was 1 denarius, which was a day's wages. So it wasn't.
Jesus calls it a tribute coin in my
Yeah, there you go.
version.
It's a tribute to Caesar.
Okay.
So it was one. It wasn't. The problem with the tax wasn't that it was onerous. It wasn't going to plunge your life into poverty.
Yeah.
It was that it was a racial insult. That was the point. All right. It was a way for Rome to show its superiority over the Jews.
Okay.
And so the refusal to pay this tax was a patriotic point. Okay. And people would refuse to pay it.
So the Jews were refusing to pay it to.
So quite often. So famously in AD. Do you know what happened in AD 70? You know the historical event. The historical event was that the Romans. There was a Jewish rebellion in AD 70, and the Romans gathered their forces and basically finally had enough. Okay. And they smashed the temple and they kicked all the Jews and the Christians out in AD 70.
Right.
And it was like a major event where the Romans decimated Jerusalem. Okay. And it dispersed everyone. Well, the whole riot that started this whole thing was the refusal to pay this tax. Okay. And every 30 years, I mean, all the time, there's always somebody some Jewish freedom fighter would refuse to pay the tax. Okay. And it would start a rebellion. And so Jesus was seen as kind of one of these people. He was also coming out of Galilee. He was also having followers. He just looked like one of these freedom fighters. And so the Pharisees and the Herodians come to him. By the way, the Herodians built the temple. So they liked this tax.
And they're trying to catch him out because
the Pharisees hate the tax because they think that it's collusion with Rome. Right. The Herodians actually quite like the tax because
they both want different answers out of him.
And they hate Jesus so much that they join together to trap him. But they're actually on 2 sides of the story.
Okay. Interesting.
So they get together to trap him, and they're basically, when they say, should we pay this tribute tax or not? They're not asking, should we be good citizens? They're saying, should we be patriotic or not? Right. Should we resist? Should we be rebellious against a foreign invader? Should we have a rebellion? It was kind of a violent rebellion they were wanting Jesus to talk about. Right. Yeah. Okay. So what does he do?
He says pay the tax.
Right. Which, if not paying the tax is the patriotic thing to do, and Jesus says pay the tax.
He's basically saying
don't be Braveheart.
Right.
He's not making a pro-freedom fighter, ethnic heritage, purity of the land kind of statement right now. He's basically
just say that, does he? He says give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's.
Yeah.
So he doesn't give a blanket, you should pay the tax. He's surely saying something more here.
So he holds up the coin, which makes him unclean because it's got an image of Caesar on it.
Yeah.
And he says, whose image is on this? And then they go, well, it's Caesar's. And he goes, well, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. So take the racial insult. It's only money. It's only racial insult. We've got bigger things to worry about.
Right.
Because the image of God is in every single human.
Yeah.
Including your enemies.
Yeah.
So they want him to make a stand for killing your enemies in the name of your tribe.
Okay.
And what he does is he says, no, take the insult and love your enemies.
So they're wanting him to reject Caesar and Caesar's rule.
They want him to take a stand on that so that he'll get killed.
Right, so someone else will kill him. They don't have
to. But they're trying to make him die on the hill of patriotism.
Right.
And to mark himself as some kind of freedom fighter, nationalist folk hero.
Yeah.
What he says is, no, pay the tax, take the insult, and love your enemies.
Okay. So is Jesus kind of saying, if this isn't about money, he's is he even making a comment about money here, or like is he saying money doesn't really matter? I don't really care what you do.
I think it's that. I think it's it doesn't really matter. I think I've talked about this before. It's kind of a language of like indifference, almost benign indifference to Jesus is benignly indifferent to things that everyone else thinks is the most important.
Yeah.
And this is another example where, like I told you, people died and killed each other over this tax.
Yeah.
And Jesus just goes,
Just
pay money, who cares, right?
Yeah.
Like he just treats it with kind of, he doesn't care about the thing that is defining everybody else's identity.
Which does then link into the final.
Yeah.
About the widow, because she is
right.
She is also kind of living a life which says money doesn't matter.
Except that if we skip ahead to her,
yeah.
Remember, there's also in between this story, there's some more anti-scribe kind of stuff, by the way. So again, the whole thing is this kind of like, is our allegiance to the temple and all its apparatus and all that the scribes tell us? And Jesus is always scoring some kind of point against them.
Yeah.
And then along comes this story at the end. I think I've talked about this on Dig Deeper. I think I skipped ahead once with John.
Okay.
As a way to describe what happens when we stop reading at the chapter breaks.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Because this is a really good example. This is one of my favorite examples of it. Because we always hear this preached on as if it's like as if it's a real like pro give to the church kind of tithe sermon.
Yeah.
But look at what happened. I mean, have a look at, so verse 36 to 37, he's kind of makes a clever point about the scribes don't really know what they're talking about. The crowd hears him with delight. So he's making a clever point, and it's kind of making the establishment look bad. And then in the course of his teaching, he continues, right? Be wary of the scribes and the chief seats in the synagogues and the chief couches. Verse 40, they devour the homes of widows. And they pray at great length for show. Okay. And they put in coins in the treasury. And then along comes a widow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Right? Jesus has just said, beware of the people who build great buildings based on the riches of widows. And along comes, and she puts her 2 coins in, and he summons his disciples, and he says, look at this poor woman. She put in more than anyone else. Now, you get a lot of preachers talking about this as if it's like a pro-giving sermon. Actually, it's an anti-temple sermon.
Okay.
Because he's just said, beware of the people that devour widows' homes. Along comes a widow who gives all she has. And he goes, look at her. She's giving out of her poverty. So he loves her. He does commend her. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And then the very next verse. But then our preaching always stops because the chapter stops there.
Yeah.
But if we just continued reading as if there was no chapter break, he then goes out of the temple, which has been built on widows' money.
Yeah.
And one of his disciples says to him, look at all these great big stones. Look at this great big building. Like they're praising the building. And then Jesus says, not one stone will be left upon another. It'll be thrown down.
Mm-hmm.
So this is actually the end of that story. Not chapter 12, but chapter 13, verse 2 is the end of this story.
So that feels kind of sad for the woman because she's given her everything. And Jesus is just like...
One of the people, he's for her because he's not pro-temple right now. He's like, the temple is the reason she's so poor.
Right.
Like this whole apparatus of, think of how like Rome has been getting money, and then the Herodians are using that money to keep the temple open, and then the scribes and the Pharisees are getting widows to pay to it, and they don't know what they're talking about, and they just like everybody looking at them. And Jesus is like, this is a mess. The whole thing is pouring money into this building and this symbol, which is not important.
Because it's actually interesting. I've just realized he doesn't actually say at any point what she did was necessarily the right thing. Because what I've got is there came
Right.
along a poor woman who put in 2 tiny coins, together worth a penny. Jesus said to his disciples, this poor widow just put in more into the treasury than everyone else. All the others were contributing out of their wealth, but she put everything she had out of her poverty. It was her whole livelihood. There's no point that he actually says how amazing that she did this.
No.
She's so good for giving everything. He's just commenting on this poor, he literally says this poor widow.
Yeah.
She's putting all this money in.
It's not an endorsement of giving everything to the church.
Interesting.
It's an indictment of the church for taking everything.
So then how do you
or church, I say with heavy air quotes. Because remember, the temple was not just a religious building, it was also the national identity, and like it was all of that, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just religion he's talking about here. It is kind of more about patriotism and national identity.
Well, and actually, once again, it's about the institution.
Yeah.
Using the weak for their purposes. Almost.
It's about institutions grinding up people in order to keep going.
Right. Exactly. And it's about so then what do we then say? What does this say to our church that asks for money from people who have little, or even those of us who maybe have more?
Right. Well, I would say, first of all, stop using this to preach about giving. There are other places to talk about giving. But yeah, I mean, I would say if you are a person of power in your institution, pay real attention to who Jesus is mad at right now.
Yeah.
He's really mad at the powerful people who are growing rich off of the generosity of poor people.
Yeah.
Who are being ground up and spit out by the system. And meanwhile, we are just living the high life. That's where he's mad at. This is not a teaching aimed at poor people saying you should be more generous.
Right.
This is a teaching at rich people going, what the hell are you doing? You are making poor and destitute people just so you can swan around in robes. Like this is a blasphemy. This is disgusting.
Yeah, that is this is crazy.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's changing the whole frame of the debate. Yeah.
I mean, so later on, then you will get generosity. Like you get radical generosity. You get the woman who pours out her lifetime's supply of ointment at Jesus's feet. You get Zacchaeus who comes down out of the tree. Yeah. You get different people being generous. So it's not like there's nothing in there about generosity. And then you get the book of Acts, which is just filled with acts of generosity and people being moved by the Holy Spirit to give to others and to make sure there's no poor amongst them.
Yeah.
But that's really different than building a national.
That's the key, right? Is that it's about receiving, it's more about taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor than it is about taking money from the poor and giving it to the rich.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying this is about.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's where I wanted to frame it, that I think all of these stories in some way are about the temple and the types of people that are benefiting from the temple. But then I'd quickly want to say, when you hear the word temple, don't just think religion.
Yeah.
Think the structures that give your life meaning and identity.
Yeah.
And it was much more closer to what we would call national identity than what we would call religion when we talk about it.
But it is relevant for our church today.
Yeah. Yes, because is our church today an institution which is grinding people up and spitting them out? Or is it one which is willing to dismantle itself once it realizes it's hurting people?
Probably both. Both and
right.
At different times.
So there is definitely stuff there today. And again, the temple tax stuff, I think the message about it is not about like pay your taxes. It's about don't kill people in the name of your patriotism.
Yeah.
Which is super relevant today. In fact, it's more relevant.
This is a question that we've got. Why do you think most preachers preach on this passage differently? What are people missing? Why is it is it just that we've been blinded by capitalism?
Well, yeah, yes, and don't underestimate the power of the chapter break.
Right.
These verses and chapter breaks, they've absolutely like colonized our imaginations. They dominate.
Yeah.
And there's other examples I can give, but this is one of my favorite ones. But there are other ones where the chapter break has just been put in for various reasons, and it's totally changed the way that it's changed world history sometimes, these chapter breaks. And you really have to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go back to the Caesar. Just go back to the Caesar bit. When he says give back, give God back what belongs to God.
Yeah.
Is he basically saying the coin has got Caesar's head on it? Your heart has got God's image. You're in the image of God.
Yeah.
Give your whole life to God, basically.
Yeah, and also like it kind of has to do with where is your value going to be? Is it going to be on the things that have Caesar's image? Is that what's going to occupy all of your moral attention, or is it going to be the things that have God's image?
Yeah.
What's the thing that's going to occupy all of your energy?
Yeah.
So he's just shifting the headlights, and he's saying, just let Caesar and have his money. Just do the money thing. We're going to focus on the image of God thing.
Yeah.
Which is everyone.
Which again, so for us today,
yeah,
in terms of the where do you put your time, your money, all your resources?
Yeah,
he's basically saying give it not to those who want you to be partisan and who want you to stake your kind of worldly claim in different things.
Yeah, and it's that phrase I keep using, that idea of you clutching tightly to what is rightfully yours, because a lot of this stuff is like, we should defend our racial purity. This is ours. This is our land, and so there's that kind of righteous anger, and it's totally legitimate. That's the other thing. It's like nobody is denying that the Romans have invaded the land and are doing this racial insult. Like that's not the issue.
Yeah.
The issue is, what do you do about it?
Because actually the Roman Empire was completely immoral, entirely, like the things that Caesar did. It must have been absolutely mind-boggling that he was to say, yeah, give it to Caesar, because to sound as though you are endorsing Caesar is just
right.
Crazy.
This is you have to notice the force of this. This is Jesus standing up in the middle of the, I don't know, the when the Brits, the Argentine War, when or the Falklands War, or during the Iraq bombing of Iraq, in the middle of America, and Jesus stands up and talks, and it identifies with Argentina, or identifies. He's identifying with the enemy.
Yeah.
Or after 9/11, on September the 12th, he stands up and he identifies with Saudi Arabia.
Right. So he's even more than just saying, don't worry about it. Don't worry about the money that you're giving to Caesar. He's actually saying, allow them to be people who you can love and who you can identify with. Because
everybody the freedom fighter groups, the Pharisees and others, they wanted to stop this tax.
Yeah.
And they were basing a lot of their identity around the stopping of the tax.
Right.
And it was the source of conflict with other Jews who thought that we should pay it in order to keep this thing going. But they're all doing it for patriotic reasons, because the Herodians are also like, well, this is how we keep Israel going, is we pay the tax and we care about it. And the Pharisees are like, well, this is how we keep Israel going, we resist the tax.
Yeah.
Jesus is kind of like, well, who cares?
Yeah.
Right?
He's just saying, focus your mind on other things that aren't patriotism, aren't the temple.
So he kind of proves himself not to be very pro-patriotic in one hand, but he's also he's also clearly not violently trying to suppress the Jews either.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of Rome. It's not a pro-Rome statement.
Yeah. He's just not taking say. It's almost, again, it's like that. I am a king of a different kingdom.
Yeah.
I exist on a different plane he is deeply present and commenting on this world's politics.
Yeah.
But he has an otherness to him, which allows him to say it's okay, it doesn't matter. It matters, but it doesn't matter because
Well,
we
this
have
is where
something
it's
higher.
exactly, this is where it's political, because he's not saying I'm separate from the world. He's saying I'm in the world, and the things I care about are not the things you care about.
Yeah. Which makes it possible for us to exist in the world.
Yeah.
But have a sense of detachment almost from them.
Yeah.
To be able to say, I'm going to engage with this, but I'm always going to know that there's something higher and outside of our realm of understanding almost that I am aiming towards.
Yeah. So we got a good question about how do we reconcile this with the call to stand up to injustice in the world. All right. First of all, well, I don't think this isn't against that at all. It's kind of the opposite. Like, what is the greatest cause of injustice in the world, if not something to do with the endless cycle of violence and revenge?
Yeah.
And of one group building up its power base at the expense of another group. And then that subjugated group will eventually take over power, and it will do it to somebody else. And it's just the tale as old as time. And it never really cares about the people who are being ground down by it. It only cares about who's at the top of the pile. The Pharisees don't care about all the human beings that are going to get killed when they get their violent revolution. They want their violent revolution to purge some sense of racial purity and patriotism. They don't care that all these Jews are going to die and all these Romans are going to die. They're not caring about that at all. So what's the real injustice here?
Yeah, because the Romans are oppressing the Pharisees, but as we said before, the Pharisees are oppressing others just as
Yeah,
much.
and also if the Pharisees get their race riot that they really want, when everyone refuses to pay the tax, that's going to kill a whole lot of human beings.
Yeah.
On all sides. And Jesus is like, he cares more about the human beings than he does about the racial politics.
Right.
So he's not being against injustice right now.
Yeah.
He's just saying you're not caring about the right things.
Which again is that interesting thing of give back to God what belongs to God. If we all have the image of God in ourselves,
yeah,
to allow for anything that is partisan or violence upon anyone who is a child of God,
yeah,
is injustice.
Yeah.
But then it's interesting, isn't it? Because there are times where there, as Jesus shows with the woman, where you have to take a side. You have to take a side with those who are being oppressed.
Yeah, but he's
whilst
not
at the same time loving your enemies. How do you do that?
Our human tendency is we see injustice. All right, so here's what I often say, like Christians are really good, or they think they're really good at using the Bible to identify injustice. But then they totally abandon Jesus when it comes to what to do about when you notice injustice, right?
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, I see injustice, I see evil. Look, the Bible tells me it's evil. And they're like, yeah, okay, so now what does the Bible say when you see evil? And that's where a lot of Christians just pretend like they didn't actually see any of those passages where you're meant to love your enemy, or you're meant to do not resist an evil person, says Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. Like, we don't take that seriously, what that might mean. We just
and actually, how does Jesus resist?
He submits. He submits to it. He lets it happen to him. He exposes it to open shame. So now I'm going way off piste here, but in Colossians 2, you got to read Colossians 2 and see what happens at the cross. All the powers range against Jesus, and he exposes them to open shame. He nails them to a cross, and they're kind of seen for the shabby powers that they are.
I was reading something earlier this week about the early church and how the Roman emperors found them to be the most, they couldn't overcome them because they weren't scared of death. Actually, when you have a group of people who are like, kill us, so what? That's actually the most powerful. By persecuting them, they actually enabled them to grow more. Yeah. So there was nothing they could do about them. And that's how Jesus, it's interesting how we think the way to overcome injustice is to fight. Because that will result in justification for those who are oppressed. Whereas actually what Jesus says is, if submit, there is power in powerlessness, and he totally redefines our understanding of what power is.
Yeah, and also that whole thing of like completely like, if you're a ruling oppressor treats you like a violent barbarian, and then you act like a violent barbarian,
Yeah.
what has really changed? What have you done? But
Yeah.
if your violent oppressor captures you and tortures you and wants to put you to death, and you refuse to kill your enemy, even when you could,
Yeah.
then you're breaking the cycle, or you're singing off a different hymn sheet. There's all sorts of things. And I kind of quickly want to add that we don't do this stuff because it works. Like, we do it because Jesus asked us to.
Yeah.
And that you're always going to be a witness to Jesus. Either the powers admit that they were wrong, or the powers kill you. But either way, you're a witness to Jesus.
Yeah.
But I mean,
martyrdom. It's interesting you say we don't do it because it works, but actually martyrdom has worked throughout.
Well, exactly. Sometimes it does. Yeah. But
like, we wouldn't be where we are today without all those people being martyred for the faith.
Yeah, I often say, like, we don't do it because it works, but sometimes it works. But if you only did things because it works, then you just become just like your enemies, who think might is right.
Interesting.
Right? And we don't think might is right.
Yeah.
We think you can win a battle and still lose the war.
Yeah.
And so this is part of what is going on here, is this idea of like, you are a different people, a different nation. You fight differently. You use your power differently.
Which is interesting as well. If we move on to that, I was interested that your translation said, love God with all your reason.
Yeah.
It's almost like the reason of God is so counter to our own reasoning and our own understanding.
Right.
It's almost like saying, love God by redefining the way you reason.
That's a good point.
To reason like him.
Yeah. Give your reasoning over.
Yeah. Love him with your thinking by thinking like he does, not like you do.
It's interesting, like in Colossians 2, which I mentioned before, the powers and principalities that are supposed to be arranged against Jesus. One of them, Paul explicitly identifies with common sense.
Yeah.
He calls it basic principles of human thinking. And he's not referring to like philosophy. He's talking about like things that we just all assume without ever and taking it for granted.
That is a power that is
power. So
in some way.
Kind of actions you just take for granted and habits you just have. Those things are powers that have gripped us. And Paul says, don't be gripped by common sense.
Yeah.
Right? And he then describes that as one of the things that Jesus sacrificed or nailed to the cross.
Yeah.
And I just think we got to pay attention to that, because common sense says, oh, when you see a bully picking on somebody, you got to kill that bully, or you got to be an even bigger bully. That's common sense.
And I think we think common sense is innate within us.
Right. No.
But actually,
we all share in common.
We're all formed by the world we live in, right? When none of us are a blank slate that just gets common sense and suddenly knows how to respond to things.
Exactly.
We're shaped by this world, and
shaped by our habits. We instinctively act when we see things, and we think it's natural, but it's not. It's something we've been formed by.
Yeah.
Our common sense. Yeah. So a lot of the Gospels are just they're re-educating us, or they're reforming our own sense of what should happen in any situation.
Yeah. It just makes you realize what did the early church call it? Catechesis.
Catechesis. Yeah, exactly.
Catechesis.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What does that phrase mean again?
It means being trained up or guided.
Yeah.
And so
they literally had to teach people how to be Christians.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, like famously, it took about 2 or 3 years. So imagine an alpha course that takes 3 years. And imagine that happening at the height of persecution.
Oh, wow.
You think you'd be wanting to grow as much as possible, but actually what you would do is, if you wanted to join the fellowship of believers, they basically went, okay, you have to live with us for 3 years first before you get baptized. Because once you're baptized, you're joining us. And we need to make sure you know what you're joining.
Yeah.
So the catechesis was like a time of being shaped by the community. Your mind was being trained. And so the discipleship happened first.
Yeah.
Then you got baptized because you were getting baptized into something.
And because actually a lot of us, as it is clear from this passage, you know, what we're talking about now, I'm like, this is so new. And I've been a Christian my whole life. So I don't know what I've signed up for.
We've been catechized into liberal, capitalist, Western democracy.
Right.
That's what really shapes our imagination. Patriotic, liberal capitalism.
Yeah.
And so all of our responses to problems always go to violence or money or nationalism.
Yeah.
And that you see that all the time. And a lot of the Gospels are actually deliberately trying to wean you off of that.
Yeah. Speaking of which, the commandment that this lawyer comes to ask him, love the Lord your God, well, mine says with all your heart and all your soul and with all your understanding and with all your strength. Is that what you think? Do you think that's kind of what Jesus is saying here? Like be reformed and be reshaped into the understanding of Jesus. What more is he saying?
Well, this is part of the tradition that is showing in the Gospels. There's an open question about Jesus' relationship to the law, to the Hebrew law in the scriptures, because on the one hand, Jesus is openly defying the temple.
Yeah.
Okay. And he is making fun of priests and scribes, and he's doing all sorts of things that really make him not out to be a good Jew.
Yeah.
And then people turn around and ask him what he thinks about the law, and he basically goes and endorses it. And in the book of Matthew, at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Don't think I've come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it."
Yeah.
And he says all these things. And so there's this, he's really messing with our mind. Like he's a real awkward bugger, Jesus. Like he doesn't fit. You can see why he got killed, because he doesn't, the patriots don't like him, the nationalists don't like him, the religious people don't like him, the Romans don't like him, because he doesn't fit in any of the categories. And this is one of them, where he's basic, but it kind of comes hand in hand. So what he says is like, don't be like temple Hebrews, or don't be like the high priest scribes, be like me.
Yeah.
And he kind of shines the headlight onto him again. So it's another one of these examples of him making the temple all about him.
Yeah.
Making the law all about him. So he's like, yeah, I affirm the law. Here, I'll summarize the law for you. But he's always kind of putting the spotlight onto him when he does it.
So when he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your, he's talking about himself. No, he's.
Well, this is a famous, it's called the Shema. It's a famous summary of the law.
Right.
Which is well known. He's not inventing it.
Yeah.
But his own actions are, it's like political theater or something. He's like, you also have to look at who is the guy who's saying it. So he's saying something that makes him sound like a typical Jewish teacher.
Yeah.
But the guy saying it is currently standing in opposition to the temple.
Yeah.
He's currently got all the temple around him trying to kill him.
Yeah.
Right. So the juxtaposition here is what you have to pay attention to. Is like the words sound really normal, but the guy saying them is utterly not a normal teacher. So that makes you realize, oh, okay, who do I trust now? Because both groups are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
It's not the words that I have to trust. It's the guy, who's the person, who really is the real interpreter of the law. Like who's.
It's interesting that he actually affirms that this is the guy, the only one who he actually affirms.
Yeah, it's true. It is. Yeah. Yeah. And if you'll notice that the scribe says to him, well said, teacher, you speak the truth. And Jesus says that he answered wisely, said to him. I mean, that's the new, right? Because the scribe says, you speak the truth. And then he repeats the exact same thing from scriptures. So it's not the repetition of the law that's the thing that Jesus is affirming.
Okay.
It's the wise man said, oh, okay, you're the guy.
Yeah.
All right, scribe, scribe says, okay, Jesus, I'm with you.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, you're not far from the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And no one interrogated him anymore. Like, this is about a tussle of who gets the spotlight.
Yeah. So this is
And
a good question.
he's saying, I'm the guy. If you're with me, you're in the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
Which is a big deal.
Which is linked to this question, which is really good. How important do you think it is for us to be liked? It doesn't seem to be important to Jesus, but aren't good Christians supposed to be the nice people who don't offend?
Wow.
Or is that just what we've been told by non-Christians, that we should be nice people who don't offend?
Yeah, and Christians themselves say that to each other. I mean, I think we've kind of like the blessed are the meek or the peacemaker. Like, we have this idea that a meek person is a doormat or whatever, or the peacemaker is somebody who never causes trouble. Whereas, well, actually, it's a little bit more like the meek were the people who were currently being ground down by the system.
Yeah.
They weren't like people choosing to be meek. They were people who were being forced to be.
Right. Yeah.
So you have
Yeah,
to look at the political force of that. When Jesus looks at you and says, blessed are you who are ground down by the system, because you will inherit the earth. That's quite a bit different than Jesus saying, blessed are you when you deliberately choose to act like a dormouse. Like,
But
there's a difference,
yeah.
right?
I guess the question is that maybe it's meant to be attractive, isn't it?
Attractive.
There is a common understanding of the fact that we should be attractive to the world in some way. I think often the attractiveness is we do that wrong, often by doing it on the world's terms. But there is something there must be something in what Jesus is talking about. You know, the crowd listens to him with delight.
Yeah.
There is something that's attractive about him.
I mean, partly the crowd is delighted because he is thumbing his nose at a system that they don't like very much. Like, they're also not benefiting under this system.
Right.
So
the question, should we be liked, is actually, we will never be liked by everyone in society.
No, and being liked is different than being attractive.
Yeah.
So when you shine, like when he says, you know, you're a king, you're a city on a hill, or when Paul says shine like stars in the universe or whatever, it isn't like do whatever it takes to be liked by people. It's when you are what you are, people will be drawn to you. Or the people that are going to be drawn to you, they're the ones you need to be with, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's not like a be all things, you know, do whatever it takes to be liked by everyone. It's be so distinctive so that people who want you can find you.
Yeah.
And people will, because this is a shitty world and it grinds people up and spits them out all the time.
And if you're not doing that, you will be noticed and liked.
Yeah, and they will then come to you. And what's interesting is notice how often like the scribe comes to Jesus. He's not happy in his own system either.
Yeah.
The Romans come to Jesus.
Yeah.
So like, Jesus sets himself up in such a way that he attracts people to him, even though we've just now obviously seen Jesus is not doing whatever it takes to be liked by a certain group.
Yeah.
But by being what he is, different groups can come to him.
Yeah.
And they do. They come out of the woodwork, as it were. And that is attraction without being liked by everyone.
Yeah.
So I think something like that for followers.
But I do think it is probably a signal to us that we're probably doing the wrong thing if we are not being liked by those who are the most oppressed in society.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If
we're only liked by those in power, we're probably doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's why modern day Christianity in the West is such a bad state, in such a bad state right now, that people in power want you on their side.
Yeah.
Corrupt people in power want you on their side because you're the safe bet.
Yeah.
That means something really, really, really bad has gone wrong with your Christianity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even that they think that
people who are poor and marginalized don't want to be around you because they think you're part of the system that is hurting them.
Yeah.
Like you've done it wrong. Like you're wrong. You're on the wrong side now.
Yeah.
You're not a follower of Jesus anymore. You might be a Christian, but you're not a follower of Jesus.
That's a big statement.
Yeah. You're not following the way of Jesus. Put it that way.
Yes, yeah.
Do I have a label called Christian? Who cares? I'm not debating that. I'm just saying, like, the way of Jesus was not to make the powerful comfortable,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Actually, it's about making those of us who are in power uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it's related to, like, later on, I mean, you're going to get this idea of the false prophet. The false prophet is not the one who gets their predictions wrong. It's the false prophet is who tells the group what the itching ears want to hear.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that you're not speaking truth to power anymore. You're just playing to to your own audience, and you're just getting applause.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, right? It's that kind of, you're just building a movement, a popular
Yeah.
movement, which is not being prophetic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear what you have to say about these angels in heaven. We had our passage
Yeah.
was about this bit.
It's there's a curious little I'm just reading, if you look at Acts 23, I'm just reading the footnotes here to say that there's 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Peter 3. Basically, there's a common theme I've talked about before called sons of God. It's
Okay.
probably related to the image of God. It's just this theme that the sons of God in the Hebrew scriptures were angels or semi-divine creatures that ruled the world.
Okay.
And sometimes they were called angels. When they're good, they're called angels, and when they're bad, they're called demons, right?
Okay.
But the idea is that the angels are given some kind of authority over the world. And one of the ways to think about them is that, like, each nation had an angel assigned to it.
Okay.
Right? And then you go in the Hebrew scriptures, you get like Psalm 82, I think, or maybe 89, where the Lord gathers together his sons of God, and they're gathered around his throne room. And we call him the Lord of hosts. And the idea is that he's gathered all his hosts of semi-divine creatures who are all assigned to rule different aspects of the world.
Right.
And God basically says to them, you've done a bad job. You've forgotten the cause of the oppressed. You've forgotten the widow. You're not taking care of the foreigner. And so in the Hebrew story, these sons of God, who are also called angels, they're kind of always slightly doing a bad job. It's the sons of God that got attracted to the daughters of men in Genesis, and then they're the reason that there was a flood.
Right. Okay.
Because they're like not keeping to their place. Like they shouldn't be coming down and having sex with women and having giant babies. They should be staying up in heaven and being rulers, right? And there's all this kind of mix up, and that's the Tower of Babel was an attempt to reach back up to heaven. People who thought they were the children of this union between angels and humans were then saying, we're going to go back up to heaven now.
Wow. Okay.
So it's just all like a kind of an upset of the right order of things.
Yeah.
And it has to do with ruling and reigning. And so that's in the Hebrew scriptures, that there's this idea that the sons of God are kind of doing a bad job of ruling the world.
Okay.
And what you get in the New Testament is you start to build on the idea that now Jesus's people are the new sons of God.
Okay.
And that the old sons of God have been cast down, and that Jesus is creating a new creation. And there's new sons of God in his place. And a son of God doesn't mean male, it means the heir, the rightful heir, right?
The custodians of his kingdom.
Yeah. And so when you get these things about, like, don't you know that you're going to be angels? Don't you know that you're not a human, you're an angel? Don't you know that? And later on, the Apostle Paul will say, why do you argue with each other? Don't you know you're going to judge angels one day? He says, and he says, women, you should cover your hair in church because of the angels, so that the angels aren't attracted to you. And he's going back to that story in Genesis.
Right.
And the whole thing is that there's, in the early Christian imagination, it's that humans are now taking the place that once belonged to the sons of God.
Okay.
And that all creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed in Romans 8, which is us.
Which it is Christians.
Well, Jesus. Yeah, Jesus people.
Right.
Because we are heirs with Christ.
Okay.
Right? Christ is the Son of God, and we are heirs with Christ. And the idea is that we are reigning and ruling this world with and as Jesus did. And you're seeing a hint of that even here, where Jesus is kind of saying, hey, you're not just, why are you having this petty argument about marriage? Don't you know you're an angel? Or you're going to be like an angel?
Okay.
Right? So there's this, that's kind of part of the...
So is he kind of saying you're focusing too much on the things of this world? Stop doing that. Think about the kingdom instead.
Yeah, think about what you're really here for.
Yeah.
And obviously it's like a stupid game. They're just trying to trap him. It's just kind of dumb. He just ignores it.
I mean, it's not dissimilar to his response to the season one.
Exactly.
Like, stop fighting over that. Exactly. Think about what you're really here for.
Yeah, that's what's happening in both of those stories. He's saying, stop fighting over these things that aren't important. Marriage and nationalism, who cares?
Yeah.
Think about that you are actually some sort of ruler over, you have authority and responsibility right now. Which
again is quite a big challenge to a church that has in many ways idolized marriage.
Of course. Yeah.
Today.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway,
isn't the be all and end all.
And then later on he says, he's not the God of the dead, but of the living. You are far astray. You've gone way off base. And it's just it's like a kind of a constant reminder of like, you guys are so concerned about your genealogies and your heritage that you've inherited and that you're preserving. You're paying attention to the stuff that happened.
Right.
Like, pay attention to what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which does that link into what he talks about with David later on?
Yeah. Well, he says, David said to my Lord. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is part of also King David. So remember when Jesus was storming the temple?
Yeah.
They're all crying, Hosanna, here's King David.
Yeah.
And so remember that King David is like the kind of King Arthur figure, right? He's this sort of folk hero. So Jesus, the people want him to be like David. They're kind of putting that label onto him.
Yeah.
Want him to be the King Arthur guy. And he basically doesn't, he kind of always sort of makes fun of David, or he puts him in his place, or he doesn't come to the temple on a war horse like David would have. He comes on a donkey.
Yeah.
And here he makes a kind of a joke about King David not being like
the son of David not being the Messiah.
Yeah. And the son of David there's somebody higher than David who David is looking up to, and Jesus is putting himself in that position. So he's putting David in his place. He's
challenging the Jewish mindset, which is we are the top, like our heritage is the...
Yeah, he's playing with their national privilege.
Yeah.
Their grievance.
Yeah.
Not giving them what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah. And every time he's doing it, he's also sort of making fun of the temple apparatus that's keeping this going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's 9:00. I want to honor time. That was mind-blowing.
It's not a lot to get over. You just got over a cold from last week, so
yeah. I'm like, but good. I like the main takeaway for me, I think, is stop getting caught up in these little arguments. Focus on the things of the kingdom of God.
Exactly. Sean, why are you worried about patriotism and taxes? Don't you know you're an angel?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, the things of the kingdom are very, very relevant for this world.
Yeah.
To overcome the oppression, but in a way that is so different to how we would understand the best way to do that.
Yeah.
Reforming our minds to think of kingdom things and think in a kingdom-like way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is so different from
and suffer oppression without oppressing others.
Yeah.
For example.
Yeah.
Even our enemies,
Yeah.
Even our oppressors. Yeah.
Amazing.
So that was fun.
That was fun. Let me pray as we close. Father, give us the grace to love those who hate us and help us to know how we should love in the way that you love, and remind us always that true power is in powerlessness and vulnerability and dependence, and it's not defined by the things of this world, and help us to have our eyes fixed on things above. Amen.
Super. We're breaking now, aren't we?
Yes. There will be no Dig Deeper next week because it's Maundy Thursday. And then I think the following week as well, it's Easter holidays. So don't try and tune in next week or the week after. And I have just read a comment from a friend of mine who I have been having an ongoing argument with about pacifism, and I think we have just won him over to the cause of pacifism, which is a big win for me. I've been trying to convince him that pacifism is the way.
Well, I've actually devoted the last 3 sessions of my podcast to this issue of violence and non-violence. So
okay, everyone tune into Stephen's podcast and you'll become a pacifist. On that note, thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you soon.
We'll see you soon. I'm sure we'll all catch up again soon. Bye, Sean. Bye,
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you so much.